This time on Plazmatech, it's all about Barra. What do you have when your engine's the size of a Cummins diesel, is built like a 2JZ on steroids, named after a fish and can make gobs of power? It's a Barra, of course. By now you had to have heard of Ford's Mighty Barra 4-litre Turbo 6. And if you've been living under a rock for all these years, what is Barra? Where did it come from? Well, a lot of people will tell you that the engine is the same as it's been all the way back in the 1960s. Now, that's not necessarily true. It's a bit like the tail of Grandad's axe. It's had the handle changed 5 times and the head changed 3 times. Is it still the same axe? The Barra is the end product of over 50 years of continual evolution by Ford Australia, starting back with the original Falcon 6-cylinder engine in 1960. And that was a strange little 144 cubic inch, 90 kilowatt engine that had the intake manifold cast into the cylinder head as one piece. Throughout the 60s, they bumped up the capacity and the power. Eventually we got to the cross-flow motor of the 70s. And this was really the first major step in evolution towards the Barra. That change in the cylinder head allowed for a better combustion chamber and larger intake and exhaust runner volume, making for a much more efficient engine. Ford then gave it an alloy head in the early 80s, and EFI was introduced not long after that. Ford also started playing with turbocharging secretly behind closed doors at that time, and there was even a twin turbo kit made by AIT that officially, in the mid-80s, produced 268 kilowatts of power. After that, along came the overhead cam engine, and this is really where the Barra comes from. It really has nothing to do with those older Falcon engines. When Ford went to the single overhead cam motor, they completely changed the whole design up. And basically the only thing it shares with the old engines, and as does the Barra now, is the bore spacing, and that's the distance between the center of each cylinder bore, and in some cases, the conrod main bearings, and that is it. The Barra finally made the scene in 2002, and Ford fans have been waiting with bated breath for years for Ford to finally have a decent response to Holden's Gen 3 V8, or the LS1. What we thought was going to be a serious V8 contender actually turned out to be a Turbo 6, 240 kilowatts in the XR6 Turbo, and it was a world beater at the time. And the tuning aftermarket picked up pretty much straight away. In the 18 years since, the aftermarket support for Barra has just grown and grown, as have the horsepower figures. From what started in its earliest days as a challenge to get to 300 kilowatts, we now see numerous workshops competing around the country to see who can get their Barras into the 7-second bracket. The art of making power from your Barra has come down to a fine science these days. Now, most workshops and tuners will have their own particular way of getting to a certain power level, but the fundamentals are all the same. Now, if you're not already aware, the first key modification you're going to hear everyone talking about in the Barra world is valve springs, particularly if you've got a first generation Barra, which is found in the BA and BF models. The valve springs in those were particularly soft, and in most cases, you're going to want to change these out before you even start to do any further modifications to the engine. Particularly now, as the oldest Barras are about 18 years old. Some of them have done over 250,000 kilometers, so even if you think they might go the distance, it's a real good idea to change them out now before they become a problem later. Now, luckily at Plazmaman, if you're ordering one of our intercooler kits or an intake manifold for your Barra, we've also got valve springs. These are our Pro Series valve springs, and they've been used in all manner of XR6 turbo builds, up to and beyond 500 kilowatts. Now, while you're doing valve springs, you'll also want to consider doing a set of billet oil pump gears. The factory oil pump gears are pretty solid. They can last up to a certain amount of power, but again, considering that in most cases, a lot of Barras now a bit older, they've got some more Ks on them, really good idea to stick a set of pump gears in there, especially if you're going to be chasing anywhere beyond 350 kilowatts of power. Head studs will also be important if you're going to be chasing big power figures. Now, you'll hear people talk about 12mm head studs and 14mm head studs. 12mm is the standard factory size, and you're replacing them with a higher strength stud. In most cases, this is all you're ever going to need. 14mm head studs are generally only found in cars producing well over 1,000 horsepower. Alright, so now you've got some basic strengthening mods in place. You're probably thinking, what do I need to do to get X amount of power? Okay, so first things first, when you're starting to get into modifying your Barra, you need to know exactly how much power you're looking to make, because that's going to determine the parts that you're going to use. And secondly, you also want to think about your budget. What can you afford to do? Because this is also going to determine how much power you can make. Now, a good basic power figure to throw around for most BA, BF Falcons is around about 380 kilowatts. This is sort of your stage one level of tuning. Now, again, a lot of workshops and tuners will be able to do a bit more than that. It all just depends on exactly what combination of parts and how they do their tuning. You'd be looking at valve springs, oil pump gears, and maybe head studs. It depends on the condition of your engine. So basically for a BA or BF Falcon running the standard turbocharger and pump fuel, in addition to your valve springs and oil pump gears, and maybe a set of head studs, depending on the condition of your motor, to make anywhere around 350 to 380 kilowatts, you'd be looking at upgrading your fuel system. So you'll definitely want to upgrade your fuel pump and also your injectors. 1000cc injectors, E85 compatible, are very common. From there, you'll want to do a dump pipe and cat. Now you can use this in conjunction with the factory exhaust system. XR6 turbos are a little bit backwards in that way. Normally on most cars, one of the first things you'd modify is your exhaust system. Chuck on a cat back, easily one of the first mods you do on any car. In the case of the XR6 turbo, the factory exhaust in some cases has been seen to handle 500 rear wheel kilowatts. So at this entry level, you don't need to change your cat back. You can just simply install a larger, higher flowing dump pipe and cat converter, and that'll see you through. Now, of course, all this stuff can be bought through us at Plazmaman. We can definitely help you out with anything you need for your Barra, as can the very next modification you're going to need, which is upgrading your intercooler. The factory intercooler in most BAs and BFs are actually kind of small. They only have about a 57mm inlet on them. So once you start turning the boost up, they do start to become a little bit restrictive. So upgrading the intercooler is an absolute must. Here you can see a factory BA BF F6 intercooler in comparison to the Plazmaman BA Falcon 1000 horsepower intercooler. Now, as we said before, each workshop and tuner will have their own particular way of getting you to a certain power level. But these basic modifications we've just run through there, again, should get you to around 350 to 380 kilowatts from your BA BF. Now with the FG, it's a little bit different. When Ford went over to the Gen 2 engine in the FG, they introduced dual variable camshaft timing, so variable camshaft timing on both the intake and the exhaust, and they did make the engine a bit stronger. The valve springs are a little bit stronger, the bottom end is stronger again.
But Ford downsized the turbocharger, so they went from a GT3582 turbo to a 3576 turbocharger on the XR6. Now what that means is they shrunk down the size of the turbine housing to make it a little more responsive. So when running the standard turbo on an FG, the amount of power you can make with the same modifications on a BA or BF does mean you will make a little less power in most cases.
But again, this all depends on exactly what package your workshop and tuner provide for you and the condition of your engine. Basic bolt-on upgrades, we can see that it's real easy to gain, in some cases, over 100 more kilowatts of power out of your stock XR6 turbo. But what if you want to go even further? What do you need to do then? Now, the next steps from there is upgrading your turbocharger. The most common upgrade is a GTX 3582. These are sold as a supercore package and can use your standard turbo rear housing, obviously machined to suit. Obviously, with a bigger turbocharger, there's more airflow, higher boost pressure. You're probably going to want to upgrade your intercooler as well. Luckily, Plazmaman have intercooler packages for Falcons to suit pretty much any power level. Once you start getting beyond 400, 500 rear wheel kilowatts, that's when most people start looking at upgrading the intake manifold. Now on your FG Falcons, the factory intake manifold is actually pretty decent. We don't see too many people upgrading this until they're really wanting to push into the deep end of horsepower. When it comes to intake manifolds at Plazmaman, right next to intercoolers, this is our forte, and Barras, as you might have guessed, is one of our specialities. Now, with our intake manifolds, we do have a few options for the Barra. For BA and BFs, we actually have a top half intake replacement section, or more commonly known as a top half plenum. This replaces the factory top half of the intake manifold. On the BAs and BFs, the intake manifold is a two-piece design. The top half can be removed, and we replace this with a forward-facing plenum. In some cases, we've actually seen these top half intakes be used to make over 1,000 horsepower. From the top half plenum, we step up to our full Billet Runner intake manifold. Now this one here is actually our retro conversion intake. This is used for older cars when you're swapping in a Barra engine. It has a slightly reduced dome, which allows for better fitment in a lot of older car engine bays. But from here down, it's exactly the same as our BA through FG Falcon Barra intake manifold. They're available in 6 injector, 12 injector, and twin rail 12 injector for when you seriously need to get big fuel for big power. And if you're wondering, yes, these intakes are well proven. For example, King FGX from Empire Mechanical and Racing, the world's quickest and fastest FGX Falcon, runs Plazmaman intake. Now I know what you're thinking. You're looking at the bigger intake, you're thinking about a bigger turbo, and you're starting to wonder, what's it gonna take to make 1,000 horsepower? And with the Barra, it's actually pretty easy. You don't need to change the crankshaft, don't need to change the engine block. Cylinder head stays stock, unported. You can even leave the factory camshafts in place. All you really need to do is those key strengthening mods we talked about earlier, so valve springs, head studs, oil pump gears. You want to throw in a much better head gasket, and you're going to need a stronger forged set of conrods and pistons. Pretty much once you've got that in place, it's up to your turbo, intake and fuel system combination along with tuning to get you to that kind of power. Now, as we've been saying all the way through this video, each workshop and tuner is going to have their own specific way of getting you to that number. But the fundamentals are basically stronger rods and pistons, better valve springs, better head studs, better pump gears, and that's pretty much it. Now, as you've heard throughout this whole video of Plazmaman, we've got a huge range of Barra gear. It's pretty much our biggest range of parts we do, from intake manifolds to intercoolers, valve springs and retainers, head studs, head gaskets. We even supply atomic timing chain kits, and we can supply with the turbocharger you need to get the big power from your Barra, along with your fuel system as well. Well, that pretty much covers the basics of what you need to know about the Ford Barra engine and how to make some decent power out of it. We'll be covering some more in-depth topics on the Barra later on in future episodes of Plazmatech, but for now, if you need any more information or help with your Barra build, you can give us a call at Plazmaman anytime, hit us up via email or Facebook, check out our online store to see our range of Barra products, and we also got to give a big shout out to Empire Mechanical and Racing for letting us film at the workshop today and for a little bit of information.